Hello, and welcome to this discussion on the block-based exam case approach to hemiplegia, a structured clinical reasoning framework for medical students. Hemiplegia, as we know, is defined as a complete paralysis of one side of the body. This typically due to a contralateral upper motor neuron lesion situated above the level of the pyramidal decussation. Now, this structured approach follows a very clear, very logical clinical reasoning chain. It starts from the chief complaint, moves to anatomical localization, then builds the pathological hypothesis, follows up with the etiological diagnosis, and finally ends with clinical confirmation. Let us begin with Block 1. Block 1 focuses on the chief complaint, which is usually presented simply as weakness of one side of the body. This right here is where anatomical localization begins, because the pattern of weakness gives us our very first diagnostic direction. If the face, arm, and leg are equally affected, it suggests a lesion in the internal capsule, indicating a pure motor stroke. But if the face and arm are more involved than the leg, it points to the middle cerebral artery cortex. This pattern is often associated with aphasia or neglect. Conversely, if the leg is weaker than the arm, we suspect the anterior cerebral artery cortex, and this typically presents with behavioral changes. Crossed findings, such as an ipsilateral facial palsy with contralateral body weakness, point directly to the brainstem. Hemiplegia with hemisensory loss suggests thalamic involvement. If there is a visual field defect, like homonymous hemianopia, you need to consider the occipital lobe or optic radiation. Hemiplegia accompanied by ataxia indicates cerebellar peduncle involvement, whereas hemiplegia with completely intact sensation, isolated entirely to the motor pathway, strongly suggests a capsular stroke. Please, and this is important, note the red flag patterns here. Sudden hemiplegia with aphasia or neglect is likely a large vessel occlusion, requiring immediate emergency intervention. And if hemiplegia is accompanied by a decreased level of consciousness, you must always consider a hemorrhage. Moving on to Block 2, we look at the history of present illness. We do this to generate the pathological diagnosis by analyzing 4 core dimensions. The first dimension is the mode of onset. A hyperacute onset, meaning within seconds to minutes, suggests an embolic stroke, while an acute onset, meaning over minutes to hours, suggests a thrombotic stroke or a hemorrhage. Subacute presentations, those developing over days to weeks, point towards a tumor or an abscess. And chronic progression, meaning over months, suggests a neoplasm or a degenerative condition. Recurrent episodes could indicate transient ischemic attacks, multiple sclerosis, or complicated migraines. A vital clinical pearl to remember, always remember this, is that a sudden onset is vascular in origin until proven otherwise. Vascular until proven otherwise. The second dimension involves precipitating factors. Atrial fibrillation suggests a cardioembolic stroke, while recent trauma points to an epidural or subdural hematoma. A postpartum state can lead to cerebral venous thrombosis, and a systemic infection might indicate a brain abscess. A hypertensive crisis strongly correlates with hemorrhage, whereas cocaine use can precipitate severe vasospasm. The third dimension evaluates the evolution of paralysis. Deficits that are maximal right at onset are typically embolic, whereas those progressing over hours are thrombotic. A stepwise progression is characteristic of lacunar infarcts, and gradual worsening suggests a growing tumor. Finally, the fourth dimension is the progression pattern. An improving course indicates a transient ischemic attack or resolving edema. A stable course suggests a completed infarct, and a worsening course points to an expanding bleed or tumor. Block 3 covers past history, which shifts our focus from pathology to etiology by identifying risk factors. Vascular risk factors are paramount. They include hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, smoking, atrial fibrillation, hypercoagulable states, oral contraceptive use, malignancy, systemic lupus erythematosus, and protein C or S deficiency. We must also rigorously screen for infectious causes like tuberculosis and HIV, as well as neoplastic factors like a known primary malignancy. Family history is equally important, particularly a history of early strokes, thrombophilia, or genetic disorders. And do not forget to ask about personal and social history, specifically alcohol intake, substance abuse, and any occupational toxin exposure. Next is Block 4, the review of systems, which refines our anatomical hypothesis. Associated symptoms have significant localizing value. Aphasia localizes the lesion to the dominant hemisphere, usually involving the left middle cerebral artery. Hemineglect points to the non-dominant parietal lobe. Visual field loss localizes to the occipital lobe or optic radiation, while dysphagia strongly suggests brainstem involvement. A seizure exactly at the onset of symptoms indicates a cortical lesion. Severe headache should make you immediately suspect a hemorrhage or a tumor, and the presence of fever points towards an infectious etiology. Block 5 is the neurological examination, where we finally confirm our anatomical hypothesis in a stepwise manner. First, evaluate higher functions. Check for aphasia, neglect, and executive dysfunction. Second, examine the cranial nerves. Look for an upper motor neuron facial palsy, gaze deviation, or other brainstem signs. Third, conduct the motor examination. Spasticity and hyperreflexia, along with a positive Babinski sign, indicate corticospinal tract or upper motor neuron involvement. Early flaccidity, remember, represents the acute shock phase of an upper motor neuron lesion, while muscle atrophy is seen in chronic stages. Fourth, perform a sensory exam. A pure motor deficit confirms an internal capsule lesion, while combined motor and sensory deficit suggests thalamocortical involvement. Dissociated sensory loss points to the brainstem. Fifth, assess coordination. Ataxia indicates cerebellar involvement. Finally, evaluate the gait. Look for the classic circumduction gait seen in spastic hemiplegia. To synthesize this diagnostic framework, we start from the chief complaint for pattern recognition, then use the mode of onset for pathology, and risk factors for etiology. We then use the review of systems to refine localization, the neurological exam to confirm the lesion site, and finally imaging to confirm the diagnosis. Our mental diagnostic flowchart for hemiplegia categorizes the approach by onset. Sudden onset is vascular, where risk factors imply a stroke and severe headache implies hemorrhage. Subacute onset suggests a tumor or an abscess. Recurrent onset suggests a transient ischemic attack or multiple sclerosis, and post-traumatic onset suggests a hematoma. Always be aware of urgent care red flags requiring immediate neuroimaging. These include an onset of less than 24 hours, decreased consciousness, severe headache, a seizure at onset, blood pressure exceeding 220/120, or a patient currently on anticoagulants. Finally, keep these advanced clinical pearls in mind. Pure motor hemiplegia without cortical signs is an internal capsule lacunar stroke. Crossed hemiplegia is always a brainstem lesion. A seizure at onset means cortical involvement, and gradual progression over weeks is a tumor until proven otherwise. For example, if a patient presents with sudden right-sided weakness that started 30 minutes ago, has a history of atrial fibrillation and hypertension, and shows right upper motor neuron signs with Broca's aphasia, you localize the lesion to the left middle cerebral artery, you suspect an acute ischemic stroke as the pathology, and you identify a cardiometabolic source from the atrial fibrillation as the etiology.